March 15, 1935, 2:30 p.m. Two men walked into the laundry on 139th Street in Harlem. Charlie, Scarface, Murphy, and Eddie the Irish Sullivan, Dutch Schultz's enforcers. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. They simply walked in as if they owned the place. The woman behind the counter was folding white sheets. She was 32 years old, with delicate but calloused hands from work, and eyes that had already seen too much of life. Her name was Mamie Johnson, and she was Bumpy Johnson's wife. But Charlie and Eddie didn't know that. To them, she was just another black merchant in Harlem, just another source of income, just another place to extort. Charlie slammed his hand hard on the counter, causing the iron to fall to the floor with a crash. "So, sweetheart, let's talk business," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mamie didn't flinch. She simply bent down, picked up the iron, and continued folding the sheets. "I don't have any business with you," she replied calmly. "If you want to wash clothes, the price is on the wall." Eddie laughed. An unpleasant sound, like breaking glass. "Funny lady. I like that. But see, you didn't understand. We didn't come to wash clothes. We came to offer protection." "Protection from what?" Mamie asked, without looking up. "From trouble," Charlie said, leaning over the counter. "You know how it is. Harlem's dangerous. Stores catch fire. Windows get smashed. Merchandise disappears. It'd be a real shame if something like that happened to a nice business like yours." Mamie finally stopped folding. She looked straight at Charlie, and in that look there was something he should have recognized, but didn't. There was steel. "How much?" she asked. $50 a week," Eddie answered quickly. "And if I don't pay?" Mamie questioned. Charlie tilted his head, pretending to think. "Then, like I said, accidents happen. It'd really be a shame." Mamie reached for her purse under the counter. For a second, the two men tensed, hands instinctively moving toward their guns. But she only pulled out a pen and a piece of paper. "Let me write down your names. Charlie Murphy and Eddie Sullivan, right? You work for Dutch Schultz?" The two men exchanged glances. They were used to fear, to pleading, to anger, not to calm, not to questions. "That's right," Charlie said, recovering his arrogance. "And you'd do well to remember that." Mamie carefully folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. "Leave now," she said. "I'll be back Friday to collect the money," Charlie warned, turning to go. "And sweetheart, don't do anything stupid. We've seen plenty of people make bad decisions." They left laughing, confident. They thought they had just secured an easy $50 a week. They had no idea of the mistake they had just made. That night, at 9:15 p.m., Bumpy Johnson was sitting at his table in the Cotton Club. He was negotiating a deal with some numbers runners when the door opened. Mamie walked in. She never came to the club. Bumpy had rules. Business was business. Home was home. When he saw her, he knew immediately something was wrong. "Give me a minute," he told the men at the table. They vanished instantly. Mamie sat down. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was just calm. And Bumpy knew that calm. It was the calm before the storm. "Two men came into the laundry today," she began. "They said they work for Dutch Schultz. They wanted $50 a week for protection." Bumpy's jaw tightened. His fingers tapped the table once. Just once. But to anyone who knew Bumpy Johnson, that single tap was the equivalent of another man exploding with rage. "Names?" he asked quietly. "Charlie Murphy and Eddie Sullivan," Mamie answered. "I wrote them down." Bumpy was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the bar, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Mamie and downed his in one gulp. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "But Bumpy, they didn't know. They had no idea who I was." "I know," Bumpy said. "And that's why they're still alive." Bumpy left the Cotton Club at 10 p.m. He didn't go alone. He never went alone. But this time, he didn't bring his usual crew. He took only 2 men, Willie the Ghost Brown and James Quick Hands Carter, the 2 best trackers in Harlem. At 6 a.m. the next day, Willie knocked on Bumpy's apartment door. "We found them," he said. "Charlie lives on 125th Street. Eddie has an apartment on Lenox Avenue. They have breakfast every morning at Sal's Diner on 132nd Street, 8 a.m. sharp." Bumpy nodded. "Perfect. Gather the crew. But we don't do anything yet. First, I make a call." At 9 a.m., Bumpy was at a payphone on 128th Street. He dialed a number few men in Harlem knew. Dutch Schultz's direct line. When Dutch answered, his voice was hoarse from sleep. "Who is this?" he growled. "It's Bumpy Johnson," came the calm reply. "And we need to talk about two of your men." There was a pause. Dutch Schultz was many things: violent, unpredictable, dangerous. But he wasn't stupid. He knew that when Bumpy Johnson called personally, it wasn't to swap recipes. "I'm listening," Dutch said, more awake now. "Charlie Murphy and Eddie Sullivan," Bumpy began. "Yesterday they walked into a laundry on 139th Street, demanded $50 a week for protection, scared the owner of the business." "And?" Dutch asked. "Your men do that all the time, Bumpy. Why are you calling me over a laundry?" "Because that laundry," Bumpy said slowly, each word heavy as lead, "belongs to my wife." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Dutch Schultz, the man who had made grown men cry, the man who had built a crime empire, was completely speechless. "Schultz, you still there?" Bumpy asked, his voice dangerously polite. "I didn't know," Dutch finally said. "I swear to God, Bumpy, I didn't know. Those idiots, they—" "I know you didn't know," Bumpy interrupted. "If you had known, they never would have gotten near it. But see, Dutch, now we have a problem, because all my men know, the whole 139th Street knows. And if I do nothing, I look weak. And you know what happens when I look weak." Dutch knew exactly what happened. In Harlem, reputation was currency. And a destroyed reputation meant lost territory, lost respect, lost power. "What do you want?" Dutch asked. There was no negotiation in his voice, only resignation. "I want you to deliver them," Bumpy said. "Today, noon, in front of my wife's laundry. You bring them personally, and you personally apologize." On the other end of the line, Dutch Schultz did something he rarely did. He swallowed his pride. Because he knew Bumpy was being generous. Bumpy could have simply killed Charlie and Eddie and started a war. Instead, he was offering Dutch a chance to save face. "Noon," Dutch agreed. "I'll be there." "And Dutch," Bumpy added before hanging up, "bring the $50 they asked for. I want to see you hand it to my wife personally as compensation." At noon sharp, 3 cars pulled up in front of the laundry on 139th Street. From the first car stepped Dutch Schultz, wearing an expensive gray suit, his face tense. From the second car, pushed by enforcers, came Charlie Murphy and Eddie Sullivan. They were confused, scared. No one had explained anything to them. They were just told to get in the car. From the third car stepped Bumpy Johnson. The entire street stopped. Shoeshine boys stopped shining. Street vendors stopped selling. Children stopped playing. Because everyone in Harlem knew what it meant when Dutch Schultz and Bumpy Johnson appeared in the same place at the same time. It was either the start of a war or the end of one. Bumpy walked to the laundry door and opened it. "Mamie," he called. "Can you come here a moment?" Mamie came out, drying her hands on a cloth. When she saw the scene on the street, her face didn't change. She just waited. Dutch Schultz stepped forward. For a man who had ordered dozens of murders, he looked surprisingly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, his voice formal. "I've come to apologize in person. 2 of my men entered your establishment yesterday and behaved completely inappropriately. They had no authorization, no knowledge of who you are, and no right to bother you." He gestured. One of his enforcers approached with an envelope. Dutch took it and handed it to Mamie. "Here are $50, not as protection payment, but as compensation for the inconvenience and the disrespect. And I personally guarantee that nothing like this will ever happen again." Mamie took the envelope. She opened it, counted the money, and then looked at Charlie and Eddie. The 2 men were pale, finally understanding the magnitude of the mistake they had made. "You two," Mamie said, her voice clear. "Yesterday you walked into my business and tried to intimidate me. Today you're here with your tails between your legs because you found out who my husband is. Let me teach you something. Respect shouldn't come because my husband is Bumpy Johnson. Respect should come because I am a human being who works hard to earn a living. Remember that the next time you walk into anyone's business." Charlie and Eddie lowered their heads. There was nothing they could say. Bumpy then stepped closer. "Schultz and I have reached an agreement," he said loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "These 2 are going to work in my wife's laundry for the next 6 months. No pay. They'll carry baskets of clothes, wash, iron, do whatever she tells them, and at the end of each day, they'll thank her for the opportunity." The crowd that had gathered began to murmur. Some people laughed, because everyone understood what Bumpy was doing. He wasn't just punishing Charlie and Eddie, he was sending a message to all of Harlem. You mess with mine, you become mine. Dutch Schultz nodded. It's fair, he said. Then he turned to Charlie and Eddie. You heard him. 6 months. And if I hear you did anything less than perfect work, if I hear you were disrespectful in any way, you won't have to worry about Bumpy. You'll have to worry about me. Understood? Yes, sir, the two answered in unison. In the 6 months that followed, Charlie Murphy and Eddie Sullivan became the joke of New York's underworld. Two tough Dutch Schultz enforcers working in a laundry, taking orders from Mamie Johnson. But here's the interesting part. Around the 3rd month, something changed. Charlie and Eddie started to actually work. Not because they had to, but because Mamie treated them with dignity. She taught them the business. She talked to them about their lives, their families. At the end of the 6 months, when their time was up, both asked to stay. Not as enforcers, not as collectors, but as legitimate employees. Mamie hired them, and they worked in that laundry for another 3 years, until Dutch Schultz was killed in 1935, and his empire collapsed. The story spread quickly, not just in Harlem, but throughout New York. The story of how two enforcers tried to extort Bumpy Johnson's wife and ended up learning a lesson about respect, dignity, and second chances. But the real lesson wasn't for Charlie and Eddie. It was for everyone else. Bumpy Johnson could have started a war. He could have killed the two men and sent their heads to Dutch Schultz in a box. But instead, he chose something more powerful. He chose to turn enemies into allies. He chose to teach rather than destroy. And in doing so, he proved something every great leader eventually learns. True strength isn't in how many people you can bring down. It's in how many people you can lift up. Years later, when a reporter asked Mamie Johnson about that day, she smiled. People always talk about how tough Bumpy was, how ruthless he was, how dangerous, and he was all those things. But what people don't understand is that he was also strategic. He didn't waste violence when wisdom worked better. And as for Charlie and Eddie, they closed the laundry for 3 days when Bumpy died in 1968. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because 30 years earlier, one man had given them a second chance, and that second chance had changed their lives forever.